Hi, my name is Michael White, mix engineer and founder of the MPG Music Production School. In this video, we're going to take a detailed look inside the H-Reverb plugin by Waves. The H-Reverb plugin utilizes Waves' exclusive FIR technology. FIR stands for Finite Impulse Response. In addition to exceptional sound quality, the FIR technology provides detailed control over almost every aspect of the reverb shape, tone, and character. This allows you to create everything from realistic spaces to truly unique reverb effects. The H-Reverb plugin offers two components. The standard component provides up to 6 seconds of reverb time. The long component provides up to 12 seconds of reverb time. Options range from mono in-out all the way up to 5.1 in-out. We'll start by taking a quick look at the user interface and available options, and then get straight into some audio demonstrations. The primary focus of your attention and work will be centered around the graphic display area. This will provide the visual feedback for your settings and also allow you to control the basic parameters and shape of the reverb tail. The basic settings are directly below. They include pre-delay, build-up, size, reverb time, early reflection selection, ER tail balance, wet-dry mix, and the output gain control. By selecting the Expand button, you open up the parameters for more detailed editing. The sections here include decay envelope, input echoes, output echoes, dynamics section, the ER filter and reverb EQ, the dampening, envelope, and LFO section, the modulation section, and the global controls down in the bottom of the plugin. So let's start by going back up to the top here and showing some of the display characteristics up here in the main window. The zoom control allows you to zoom in this particular component, which is 6 seconds, all the way into the most minute detail, all the way down to the bottom. So you can see here the early reflections. The early reflections are affected by the size. Now, the number of them will vary the bigger the size of the space, and so if I shrink the size of the space, the number of early reflections will get smaller. Now, if I set a basic size here, I want to feed audio signal in so I get a sense of the basic feeling of what the space will be like. So for example here, I may want to take and set my balance to entirely ER, take out any other parameters, and set a basic size. So the size will primarily control the early reflections, although it will also affect the reverb tail and the way that it enters. We'll get into that in a minute. Now, we can go through a series of options once we've selected the size, and there are 10 reverb ER selections here that you can toggle through by opening up the arrow here and selecting the one that you like, or by auditioning and toggling through them one by one. When you're ready and you've found the selection that you like and the size that you like, you can now add in your reverb tail and set the balance between the tail and the early reflections. From here, we can now control parameters that center around the reverb itself. So what I want to do here is I'm going to zoom out on the display. And now if I want to hear this actual effect, I can actually hit a test button, which feeds a signal into the reverb, which excites it. So the idea here is that you can get a basic idea of what the sonic characteristics of the particular reverb are. So we'll take one other look here at some of the settings here, which is the reverb time primarily, and then we'll get into some of the other decay envelope characteristics, which are very cool. Now, when I adjust here, I can grab onto the window here, the reverb time window, to adjust the time. I can also use the marker here on the display to drag this to a shorter reverb time. So what I'm going to do here, just so we can see a little bit more of what's going on, is I'm now going to zoom in, and then this opens up the ability for me to see the other display characteristics. There is a pre-delay, and the pre-delay, as you can see, shifts the whole reverb tail backward in time. There's two ways to work. If you're in sync mode, then what happens is the delay times will lock to specific musical timings, starting with, well, depending upon the settings here, 128th notes, and then working all the way up to quarter, I believe, to quarter notes is what it shows here. Now, when we take off the sync, we can go to exact millisecond settings and move it around from there. The build-up control is the ramp-up of the actual reverb. And this serves a couple of purposes. This allows us to control the way that the reverb tail enters into the cycle of the entire reverberant field, which includes the early reflections. And so this gives you some control about the way that the actual reverb engages into the sound. So sometimes this is helpful if you have like a really large space, having the reverb kind of ramp up a little bit more, which may be something that's a little bit more characteristic of a larger space like a church or a large hall. There's also a very important control here which you can operate with the decay envelope section. There are two basic parameters. They are the decay envelope time, called X time, and the X gain control. Now, what this does, and I can grab the display here and move this marker around, this allows me to control the shape of the reverb tail and how it decays. So this is very important in terms of just being able to control the two settings simultaneously. So when we feed some audio examples into this, you'll be able to see a demonstration of how powerful this basic feature can be. Now, one other control that's important here is the density control. That's also part of the decay envelope section. So this will determine the actual density of the reflections. So at its maximum gain here, you could see this is pretty much solid in color. And then as we decrease it, you could see that it clears out a little bit, just to kind of give you a visual graphic indication of what's going on. Otherwise, the basic parameters here of the early reflection filter and reverb EQ just allow you to basically do the same, the basic things that you can do with any of the Waves plugins, which allows you to just shape and control the frequency response pattern of the early reflections and the reverb. There's also a damping control, and the damping control is different from the from the EQ section in that what it does is it controls the actual reverb time at different frequencies. So by adding in high or shelving in, for example, here high frequencies, we're adding more reverb time at those high frequencies, not adding more high frequency. The effect will sound similar, but it is different. Now, let's go straight to an audio example. So what I have queued up here is a basic drum room. And so let's start by having a listen to this, and then we can start to dig into some of the more specific parameters of each of the individual effects. So in this basic example, what I wanted to do was I wanted to set a basic space for the drums and the percussion. And so by doing some very basic, simple controls here, I found an early reflection shape by toggling through the different options here, just to kind of demonstrate how I would go about doing this. I'm going to go with number 4 here, just for an example. I could also adjust the size control here, but I like the size of the basic space here, so we'll kind of leave that alone. And now I can mix in the ER tail balance. Now, in this basic setting here, what I've done is I put some damping on the low end so that the low end from the kick drum doesn't overdrive things a little bit too much. And I've also dampened a little bit on the top end to kind of warm it off a little bit, and followed that up with a filter. The early reflections are practically flat. There's a little bit of a roll off on the top end, but that gives us a basic idea. So the little white star marker right here will work with this particular gain control, and this is the frequency for the early reflections. And then otherwise, in the EQ section, you have a low shelf, high shelf, and 2 mid-band parametrics with Q controls. So this gives you most of the basic functionality in terms of just being able to kind of EQ the reverb, and you'll see this in some of the other demonstrations that we have. Now, in this particular plugin, I haven't done a lot, but one thing that I may want to do is to add compression into this, and this can be done from the dynamics section. So I have 3 options here in dynamics: duck, compress, and DS, and I'll show you demonstrations of them all. I have a threshold, and then I have a recovery control. So with the recovery control, I basically have it set to 250 milliseconds, so based on the tempo, that amounts to about a 16th note. And so this will kind of define a little bit of the movement of the compression. So what you could hear there is just having a little bit of compression adds a little bit of pumping and breathing and solidity. And depending upon the sound effect, you'll see in some of the other demonstrations a little bit later that some of these options come out a little bit more. So let's move on from this here and go on to the snare reverb, just to kind of show you what's going on with this. So this is a very straightforward one. I didn't do a lot of extra work on it. This is pretty much just early reflections with a straight 1.25 second reverb tail. There is no pre-delay on this, there's a minimum pre-delay, and then I have a little bit of an EQ here to kind of help shape the overall sound. I've also added a compressor, so I left it out on the main drums, and I found that it worked a little bit better on the snare drum. So let's cue that up a little bit, and then let's check that out. Okay, so pretty straightforward here. Let's listen to that in the context of the rest of the drums. So in this particular case, with the dynamics, I went with a longer release time. And let's just audition that in and out real quick so you can hear the effect of that. So I think what you can hear with this in and out is that it helps to change the actual shape and the way that the envelope of it leads out. Now, there's 2 basic ways of dealing with this. So if I actually switch over here, I can also adjust this parameter with the X time and X gain. So this, I'll just kind of show you, give you a short demonstration here of how this can be a very effective way of accomplishing a very similar thing. So as you can see, just from the quick examples here, there's a pretty broad range of different characteristics that this takes on. And we can get downright extreme with this if you want, and get straight to a pure gated effect here. So like if I just pull back the reverb time here, I can actually get to a real true gate. And I can control that basic characteristic and make it as short or as long as I want. And you could hear the decay envelope, and just to give you a basic idea of like what amazing kind of control that you have with this. So we'll go back to my preset setting here, and now I want to show you a really cool feature that's part of this, and this is the reverse effect. So what I have here is I have an automated send, but I'm going to open up a straight one here so you can hear this. So by hitting the reverse button, what I've done is I've set up a reverb here without any early reflections. And so all I've done from there, and I can excite it just so we can hear an example. It helps if you unmute it. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to reverse it, and now we'll hear the effect of this. Now, what's unique about this, because you can hear a sweeping sound, is that I've added an envelope filter to this. And this is kind of where we start to open up some of the real fun stuff here with the plugin. So I set the reverb time to be 1 second, which amounts to a half note based on the tempo, which is 120 beats per minute. And what I've done here in the envelope section is I'm able to set 2 filters, a start filter here, F1, which is around 500 cycles, and then the F2 filter, which is just under 12K. And now what I've got here is I've got a sweep, a frequency sweep, and I have 2 options. I could do a resonance sweep. So let's just actually listen to some audio examples, but I have 2 options here. A resonant high pass or low pass filter, I have a Q control, and then I have a mix control. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to copy this over to the other side, and let's just play around with it a little bit. So I can increase the resonance or make it more subtle. Now, if I change some of the parameters, like I change the filter type, or if I want, I can flip it and it will go inverse. So this gives me the ability to control, just some of the basic characteristics. I can also pull out the attack time so that it swoops up and down, and set my timings that way. So this just allows you to add like a whole other layer of character onto the reverb effect. So let's just hear that and blend it in. And if I wanted to change the basic shape, this is another place where the decay envelope can come in really handy. For example, if I wanted to kind of swoop in a little bit faster, or if I want it to lag a little bit and go the other direction, I can sweep it in this direction. So let's hear those 2 options against each other. I think I like my original shape here. So we'll stay with that and kind of move on, also because I've set up the rest of the sounds kind of accordingly. So let's move along from here to one other quick one. So this is sort of a unique one. One of the more difficult things to get a good reverb sound on is the bass. And I did a kind of an unusual thing, because I normally would do something like this in a send return configuration, but just to kind of show off the plugin in a wet dry insert configuration, what I've done is I've put a mono to stereo output one on the bass. And this is going to demonstrate some other characteristics of the H-Reverb plugin. So what I've done here, as you can see, I'm zoomed in all the way that I can zoom in. So I have a very, very, very short reverb spike in here. So you can see the total reverb time is basically 130 milliseconds. And no pre-delay. And so what we have is just sort of a build up here. And then what I've done is I've added in a modulation to this. And what this is going to create is something akin to a chorus effect, except for the really short reverb replaces what would be normally like a modulated delay effect. And so in the modulation section, I have an FM mix here, which I can blend in, and that will blend in a little bit of frequency modulation. And then I'll show you a couple ways that you can also kind of mess with this to have some fun. So let's listen to this effect. And the really cool thing I like about this is that it gives like a really cool modulated effect, but it also gives this sense of depth and separation and distance to it. So that's like a simple way to use the FM mix and the modulation in there. Otherwise, all I've done here is just shaped a little bit with the EQ and also warmed up the top end a bit just to kind of make the bass not too noisy going into the reverb. So let's hear that in the track. And I have a wetter version and a drier version. Let's see which one works better. So I actually really like that effect up high, but in the context of all the other things that I have going on here in the mix, I'm going to keep this to the softer setting. It does exactly what I wanted it to do, which is to create a little bit of depth and space and kind of allow it to fit in with the drums a bit better. Let's move on up to the next one, which is a short guitar reverb. So this is something that I set up here, which also shows off a little bit of frequency modulation. And I've made some adjustments here, including a little bit of compression on the effect. What I have is an early reflection and a relatively short reverb. And I have a guitar effect here, which is modulated. So basically, this is going to be a little bit more of a chorused or flanged reverb effect. And let me just open up the stem here so we can hear it. Now, if that feels a little bit too long, I can shorten it a little bit. Or I can make the effect a little bit more subtle by pulling down the X time gain control. I kind of like the smaller setting and tighter setting in there. Kind of gives it like a nice focus to the guitar. And there's no pre-delay on this. I just added a little bit of high end here, both in the EQ and also in the dampening to kind of give the flanger effect something to kind of grab onto a little bit, which is kind of, you'll find will help to open up that. So if you're using that modulation and you want to hear a little bit more of that, then that's one way to do it. There's also another guitar effect on the opposite side. And this is just with a simple 10 millisecond pre-delay, just a really short reverb just to kind of give a little depth. All right, so that just kind of helps to create a little space there to kind of make it fit in a little bit with the drums. So let's listen to that. Okay. Okay, next up, I want to show here also another insert. This is the other insert setup that I have here, and this is sort of a little semi kind of guitar solo riff section here. And in this one, what you'll notice here is that I use the LFO section. So the LFO section is similar to the envelope section, except for the sweep sort of being in one direction. It actually modulates up and down. We'll also go into a couple of other effects that I've thrown in here just to kind of give you an idea. So what I have is like a very short reverb. So you can't always, when you look at the graphic display, necessarily be fooled by like that being a long reverb or a short reverb. You have to look at the zoom settings to make sure what's going on. And a clear sign is when you can see the separation of the early reflections here on the left. That's going to tell you that you're zoomed in pretty far. But the reverb time basically will always tell you what's going on. Now, there's a little bit of EQ to warm up the top a little bit. And now what's happening here is I have a filter sweep that's running from about 450 or so up to about 5K, and it's modulating up and down. Now here, there's two ways to operate it. If I go out of sync, I can go into any sort of timing that I want or rate, get very specific. Or if I'm in sync here, then right now I have this set to an eighth note characteristic. So let's check out this section right here. So what it does, it gives a little bit of a wah kind of effect where you can feel the sweep of it going up and down. So just to kind of demonstrate how that could be changed, let's just take this here. I got the mix at 100%. I'm going to exaggerate the Q so that you can hear the sweep a little bit more. We got a resonant high pass filter, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to play with the timing here. So there you can hear the full frequency sweep, or like a sharper there by adjusting the Q. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here, and what this does is it creates a little bit of a kind of spread, highlighted, environmental kind of sound. So when it gets to this section of the song, what you'll hear is the guitar sort of stands in its own space, and that was the idea of the effect. Okay, so that'll give you a basic idea of what that's about. Let's go on to the next thing here is the strings. And so what I've got here is I put a little automation on there at the very end so that increase the reverb time just to extend the tail of it. But primarily, that's only at the very, very end, and I'll play that for you. Now, what we have here is now we're adding in output echoes. And so we have early reflections. We have a pretty big size space here. The output reflections, or output echoes, excuse me, are represented by these yellow lines right here. So you see that I have a bit of a ramp up that's built into this, and that's purposeful. The idea is that I wanted the strings to feel like they were set back in a deeper space, and that was sort of part of the programming. Now, the output echoes, the way that they basically work is that it takes the output of the reverb and then feeds it into the echoes. So we have a size control that allows us to adjust the parameters for how far apart they are. There's a tonal character here. So as I go to the left, it'll warm it up and it'll get a bit brighter as I go switch the tone higher. So it's a kind of a low-high tone control. And then I can adjust the amount here. And let's see. Should be able to hear this effect with the strings and horns. Here we go. So what I have is a really rich, lush space there. That was the idea. So if I take the output echoes, you can hear the difference. So I wanted that to have like a deep, rich character. I kind of rolled back here with the damping down. I raised up the EQ on the low frequencies a little bit here. I also did a little bit here to kind of add in some of the warmth for the strings, and warmed up the top end here as well. And also added here down in the global section an analog control. I put this on, and what this does is it applies sort of like an NLS harmonic distortion kind of processing. I also did a compressor on here with a long recovery, and the idea of the longer recovery is because the reverb is longer, it's just meant to sort of smooth out the reverb a bit. Now, let's take a listen to this. So what the dynamics does is it adds a little bit of focus into the sound that you can hear there. And then also the analog component, I'm going to show this off in another area because I think you'll hear it come through a little bit more clearly. But that's the basic idea of the output echo. So all I'm really doing is I'm adjusting the amount, and it helps to extend or expand on the reverb time. Now, the section at the very end was just an automated extension. And I threw that in there at the end just to demonstrate that you can adjust the reverb time without artifacts. So the flexibility of the plugin is pretty extraordinary in terms of that. I also added in a horn, a reverb for the horn section. And the horns actually have like a really cool part in this. And this is now using input echoes. And so we have what we have here is meant to be like a horn room kind of thing. So I have a little bit of early reflections, but they are pulled down pretty much. And then I have a very not dense or undense, if that's such a word, reverb on the tail shape here. And then what I have are input echoes. So the input echo section is kind of cool because what it does is it gives me the ability to mix in this particular case, discrete echoes. So this is the input signal fed directly back to the output delayed. And so we'll get actually discrete delays coming out or diffused. And the diffused echoes will feed into the reverb. So they differ from the output echoes in that the output of the reverb goes into the output echo section for delay processing. And in this case, we, by setting the diffuse setting, we're taking the input echoes, not listening to them dry, that's the discrete control, but feeding them then into the actual reverb. And then you get a series of different taps, so you select the type of tap that you want. If you find out that the setting here, like say for example, like you see a 2-tap for eighth notes, but you really wanted quarter notes, this is where you can go over here to the tempo section. And if I now change the tempo here to 60 instead of 120, now that delay time, that eighth note delay time effectively doubles. And then I would be able to get that input echo at that longer section. So let's listen to the horns here. And now let's hear that in the context of the track. So what you have here with all these different effects is that you can really hear the depth of the string reverb and the power of the horns. in here. I also put a compressor on the horns, and I'm going to show you in the upcoming ones a little bit of de-essing and ducking as we get to the vocal section. So this time I'm going to actually unmute the vocals first so that we can hear them when I solo it up. And let's move on to let's start with the background vocal reverb and talk a little bit about this. So I'm going to mute the other two vocals here. So I have a compilation, a stereo compilation of background vocals here. And so what I have here is a basic reverb, relatively short, but it also has, I'm creating the length by using a 4-tap and feeding very little discrete and pretty much more diffused energy into the actual reverb to help create length. So there are two ways to create length. One is to create it by setting your reverb time longer. But then you sort of have like a much smoother style kind of reverb. But if you want a little bit more character added into the reverb, then one of the ways of doing that is by using the input echoes. So now once I have this set in there, those start to add a little bit of the layers in here. And in this case, what I've applied is a little bit of de-essing because the vocals here are a bit essy. They're sibilant. And when that feeds into the reverb, it can prohibit your ability from really getting the brightness and presence in the reverb. I'm going to demonstrate that a little bit more effectively with the lead vocal, but I wanted you to hear this basic demonstration with the background vocals.
Your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah. It's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. That's who we are. Ain't no stopping. Trust who you are. Ain't no stopping. That's who we are.
So if I add more diffused energy.
Ain't no stopping. Trust who you are. Ain't no stopping. That's who we are. Ain't no.
So you can hear the tail that's added in there just with that particular tap setting. And just to give you a basic idea of how the input echoes can be used to increase the reverb time. Now, I'll re-demonstrate this, but effectively what the de-esser does, I'll do this with the lead vocal, is I have a threshold and then I have a range control for how much it suppresses. And essentially what it does is it suppresses the input signal. So it's a de-esser on the input signal that feeds the reverb. Which is really cool. And the longer you make the range here, if you get your threshold setting correct and you set the range low enough, you can effectively almost mute the S's entirely, but still be able to add in high frequency reverb and get that presence without the S's making it cut too much. Also, what I've done here is I put a little bit of analog warmth in here with the NLS style processing so that we can hear that.
Your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah. It's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. That's who we are. Ain't no stopping. Trust who you are. Ain't no stopping. That's who we are. Ain't no stopping. Trust who you are. Ain't no stopping.
And that makes up the whole sound. So some of these characteristics are subtle. They come across in subtle ways more in the overall mix. So let's just kind of hear how this plays into the overall mix. Okay, so that gives you a basic idea of what's going on with that. The next thing I want to go to here is something where we can show off a little bit of the distortion characteristics, the drive characteristics, as well as some other things here. So you have a longer reverb time here. Now, this is primarily, for me, used for creating echoes. And so what I have here highlighted is a section. It has two basic vocals. One is like a filtered kind of distorted vocal, and then it's followed up by a little bit more of a full frequency vocal. And what I've done here is to help shape the characteristic of the echoes. So primarily what I'm using here are input echoes that you can see they're mostly discrete. And what I've done here is I've set the tempo to 60 BPM instead of 120. And so what I'm doing here is a 6-tap on eighth notes. So those are basically quarter note delay times. And then what I've done is I've fed a fair amount of that into the actual directly to the output. And then I have some of that feeding also into the reverb. So this is like a very common thing where you bring back delays. And one of the ways that you add depth is by feeding the output of those delays into reverb. And then you can kind of control the characteristics of it. So here, what's interesting is in the dynamic section, I'm using the duck function. And in this case, what that means is that when the actual vocal is feeding into it, it's actually suppressing the echoes. And then once the vocal releases, then the echoes come back out. So I can determine how quickly those echoes recovery here with the recovery time, which is in milliseconds. And so I've shaped all this basic stuff. Let's get right to listening to it. So you can hear it a little bit more clearly in the second one. So I'll cue up that section here, and I want you to hear what the ducking sounds like in and out.
Ain't no stopping, no. Trust in who you are, no stopping. Ain't no.
So you can hear there with the ducking out how the echoes sort of press right up against the vocal, whereas when it's in, you can hear the vocal clearly, and then the echoes sort of follow.
Ain't no stopping, no. Trust in who you are, no stopping.
So this was just to show how you can work with the input echoes and the output echoes to create basically what amounts to a delay effect. Now, I did try something here which is sort of fun, which is to apply an inverted reverb onto this, and I've also applied an envelope sweep here. So let's listen to this.
Ain't no stopping, no. Trust in who you are, no stopping. Ain't no.
So that's kind of fun because it gives you like a real, very, very dynamic effect. I was fooling around with this and came up with that, and we'll A/B the way that sounds in the track and see which one sounds better.
Ain't no stopping, no. Trust in who you are, no stopping. Ain't no.
Let's try it the other way.
Ain't no stopping, no. Trust in who you are, no stopping. Ain't no.
So I think perhaps in a less busy mix, the other effect might have been kind of cooler. It sounded cooler in solo. All right, let's go on to the lead vocal here. Now, the lead vocal, I've kind of put a couple of different characteristic, or I've separated basically the lead vocal into two different components. What I've done is sort of a presence kind of thing here. And so what I have here is, again, a ducker. And what I have is early reflections, an extremely short reverb with some short input echoes that are mostly diffused. And this is, it's filtered down, and it's also modulated a bit. So I have a little bit of a phasing characteristic here. And I've also done a little bit of bit crunching on here. So this is kind of cool because with the bit crunching, what this allows me to do is it allows me to basically run like into a digital 12-bit or 8-bit reverb. And it gives it a grainy kind of lo-fi kind of quality, which is pretty cool. So let's just check that out.
Your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. It's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping.
So this serves two purposes. One, it sort of it sets an immediate space here with the early reflection, so I'll take it in and out in the next example. And also what it does is it sets like an echo, like a slapback kind of effect.
Your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. It's just what we have to do to just claim the fame.
So that's the space with the early reflections.
Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping.
So that'll add a little bit of the just kind of give this a little bit of a space to the vocal, so it sort of separates. And then I have a longer reverb which is added in here, and so what I'm going to do with this here, I'll just put this out separately, and let me open this up. So this is really straight ahead, so there's not a lot of extra stuff included here except for the de-essing. And what I wanted was a pretty bright and present reverb on the vocal, so I could raise it up in the speakers a little bit. And I'll demonstrate this with the de-essing in and out, because this is really the main character.
Your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. It's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping.
So you can hear how the S's really cut and overexcite the reverb. And so the de-esser here is really powerful and really helped there. I also warmed it up a little bit here with the analog setting. And let's pop the two of these guys in here and just see what they sound like together.
Your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. It's just what we have to do to just claim the fame. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you are, no stopping, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are.
So I want to give you just a basic idea of, because I've purposely made this mix very wet, just to show that something at 120 beats per minute that can often represent or present a lot of problems in terms of putting reverbs. All the effects, every single effect that you hear in this demonstration is 100% done with the H reverb, nothing else. So that's everything in terms of the effects processing. And just to give you a sense of how you can create, there's actually 14 instantiations of the H reverb. And if you want to go back through the video and count, I already did, so I can verify it here just straight out for you, save you a little bit of time. But the idea was to show that even with a lot of reverb, making this really wet, I can actually get enough definition and detail and create the sense of depth of all the individual instruments. And that just shows the real power of the actual plugin and the amount of control that you have over all the settings. So let's have a quick demonstration of that.
It's enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can use start. We are standing just feet apart, not recognizing the reflection of a superstar. When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race. Yeah, it's We are everyday people that keep winning. Yes, we're winning. When your legs start to give up on you to run a race, yeah, it's just what we have to do. Just claim the fame. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you wanna stop, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you wanna stop, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you wanna stop, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you wanna stop, ain't no stopping. Ain't no stopping, that's just who we are. Trusting who you wanna stop, ain't no stopping.
So I think you get a basic idea of the amount of depth. Again, a little bit exaggerated on the reverb for the effect, just to give you an idea. The one quick thing that I didn't go over was the drive, which you really hear in this, which adds a bit of distortion characteristic. And this is also a very cool way of bringing out some of the other effects like the modulation. So just kind of pushing that a little bit can help to give an edge to everything. And when you combine that with the dynamics, with the input and output echoes, with the control over the decay envelope, with the different filter sweeping, LFO envelope, or normal damping, the number of early reflections, which all sound great, the amplitude modulation and frequency modulation. The amplitude modulation is another one that I added in to the long reverb, and the idea for the vocal. And the idea of the amplitude modulation is that it creates some alteration or movement in the gain of the reverb tail, which helps to shape it a little bit. So if you just run without it, it can be a little bit straight if you're not using input-output echoes like we are here. But with this, it can add a little bit of shape and a little bit of movement onto the tail. So as you can hear, like to me, this is just an outstanding plugin. It's just so much incredible depth and detail and control. It's a no-brainer for me. I really have fallen in love with this plugin in the process of putting together this track for this demonstration, and hopefully you can see that in the video. I want to give a extra special shout out to Patrick Pelisse, who gave us the crazy track here to make for this demo. Who We Are is the name of it. He can be reached if you're interested in his work at Codastar, CODASTAR @gmail.com. Patrick Pelisse is his name, and you can reference the H-Reverb video and the song Who We Are. And my name is Michael White from the MPG Music Production School. I can be reached at mpginsider.com. That'll lead you directly to my website, and you can contact me directly from there if you have any questions. And thanks for tuning in. There you have it, the H-Reverb plugin by Waves.